Okay, in this episode, we're going to discuss metal leaf and how to apply metal leaf. As you hear me saying, it's metal leaf. It's not gold leaf because it's not made of 24 karat gold like gold leaf really is. Gold leaf is beautiful and you can purchase that. It's rather expensive, and so most people might reserve using it for things like antique frames or restoring furniture, but you certainly can use it in a painting in just the same way. It's just that it's much more expensive. Metal leaf, on the other hand, is made of various metal alloys. So it'd be silver, copper, aluminum, copper and zinc is common, and those combinations will come up with different tones of metal leaf. And so they're really quite beautiful. They are also slightly thicker than gold leaf, which I imagine is because gold leaf, being so expensive, is not going to end up being a very thick sheet. But at any rate, they're always pretty thin sheets. So they come in a package like this. This is Imitation Gold leaf. It comes in a little package with orange tissue around each sheet, and usually there's 25 sheets to a package. It is a little book. It's seamed at the top here. I usually cut that because I find it's easier to handle a single tissue and the gold leaf so it doesn't fly all over the place. But gold leaf or metal leaf comes in silver tones. It also comes in copper. It also comes in pewter and various tones of gold itself, deeper tones or lighter tones, and so you can get quite a variety. And so what I do is when I get my metal leaf, I usually take a piece of it and I put it on one of my little panels that I love to use, and I apply it to a panel so that I can see the color in the hopes of knowing then what it's going to look like if I choose it for a particular painting. So I number each section that I've put on here so I can say, oh yes, I really would like to use that, and that's number 21, and I'll go to the package that has that particular product in it. The other one that's very interesting is variegated metal leaf, and that's called variegated because it has a variety of patterns depending on how they've treated it with chemicals and heat, and they'll get some are very elaborate, very fancy, and they're a little harder to use because they are so fancy. So and with any of these leaf products, if you overuse them or you get kind of crazy, it might end up ruining your composition. So using them judiciously with the rest of the materials that are adding to your collage is pretty important. So again, I will make myself a sample sheet of the variegated ones, and this one is particularly hard for maybe you to see. If I hold it too close to the camera, it almost gets darker, but I'm going to kind of tip it around a little bit so maybe you can see the reflection of the different colors and tones in these. And again, I number these so I can find the right product for the project I'm working on. And this is just another one that's kind of an interesting, more of an orange red one. And then there's one here that's got a lot of gold, but it also has a lot of blue in it. And so it's one way of kind of keeping track of what I'm going to use for my product. So anyway, this is going to be hopefully interesting to you how to apply it. There's many stages for it, and I know I enjoy using it because it is a beautiful product to work with. The first thing that you have to do is you have to put on a sizing, which basically is a glue base, that it's an acrylic base that you're going to be using to apply your metal leaf. And I put it on I try to do it smoothly. It really doesn't matter if you're doing a very textured kind of painting, but in this case you want it, maybe your metal leaf to be very smooth and very exacting, in which case how you apply this sizing will end up being kind of important. And I don't usually do my whole panel with it. I like having some of the color be behind it. So I'm going to gently smooth out this sizing. And as usual, my German Shepherd hair is on stuff, so I'm going to get rid of that because that would show through on the final product. It would be a bump, and I don't want that. And I'm going to just gently smooth that down. Now I'm going to start another one over here because I'm going to let this one dry. These do have to dry before you actually put on the metal leaf. You want it. They don't have to dry absolutely solid dry, but it has to be so that it's tacky, and this will then allow the metal leaf to stick on. And I'm going to let let them get nice and tacky, and then I'll check on them as we go along. Meanwhile, let's look at some gold leaf. I'm going to show you a couple of panels. Now this one here is very large, so you're not going to see all of it completely, but I wanted you to see that this is an unfinished collage panel that I started. Again, I have done painting with it first, and then I've applied, actually there's, well, I think there's three different types of metal leaf on this. They're all what they're considered variegated metal leaf, and so you can overlay them and change them. And I'm going to try to move this around. I hope it does show you some of the textures. It's a little hard with the lighting because the lighting gets very bright all of a sudden, but I'll go very slow, so hopefully you'll get an idea of the application. One other reason to really paint first is because when the metal leaf goes on, there may be cracks or places where it doesn't go smooth, and that's okay, because that color shows through and actually adds another texture to this. So you don't have to worry about the edges being perfect in many cases. If you do want it perfect, well, then you have to go a little slower, and you can always add some metal leaf afterwards in order to see or correct something. I have a collage that's in process right now, and it's got a lot of pieces on it at this point. And again, I'm going to show you some parts. The rest of the collage is here. This is a variegated one that I'm working on. It's a variegated metal leaf. And if you notice, I'm hoping, if I tilt it the right way, you will see this lower part here. Well, probably this section here is the best right here. I actually wanted this to blend in better with the paint behind it. At some point, this will be a finished collage. I'll move some of the pieces out of the way. I didn't want it to be gold and hard-edged here, so I took a sandpaper and I sanded it, and you'll probably notice that it is a little more dull in this section than it is in this upper section. And I wanted that to happen. I wanted that texture. I even did places where I scraped away. You might be able to see how rough I scraped that away and blended it in. And then at some point I will either paint over that. I can paint over it and blend it in more, and I did do a little bit of that. You can see where there's a little bit of paint, and then I scrubbed it away. But then also know that you're going to end up putting collage pieces on this. So whatever edge or part you don't like, you can end up putting collage paper on it and changing the look right then and there. These panels have both become tacky, which is exactly what I wanted. And now we're going to apply some metal leaf to these. One thing about metal leaf, the gal who really knows a lot about metal leaf, one of her important lessons was do not fear the leaf. One way that I've tried to tame handling these so they're not just floating around like that piece I showed you in the beginning is I keep it on the sheet of paper. I tear off one sheet, but I keep part of that paper underneath, so it gives me something of a little bit more control, but don't guarantee that it's going to stay that way. And then I'm going to just lay it down. And I'm not going to worry about an edge going off the here or whatever, because if you start trying to do it, sometimes you want it to go right to the edge. You don't want to end up, or maybe you don't. I mean, maybe you'll say, hey, I'll try a different way. So that's just laying that down. And I did pull out one of the pieces of variegated leaf to show you how they can really go nice together. And I don't want as much of it, so I'm going to lay that one up here. And of course the paper is going to maybe stay on. I'm going to try to trim this because then I can actually save this sheet. Well, I guess I can't now. But I will end up saving this piece when I take it away. Now before I do that, I'm going to take this off. I'm going to take the paper off. And here comes my trusty parchment paper, which you know I constantly tell you is wonderful stuff. I will lay that down, and that will help me just sort of press on it, lay it down, and I'll just gently rub that in. Some of the ones I'm showing you look very, very shiny. Part of that is the light is really picking up the varnish, but it actually dulls down. And if it doesn't dull enough, I will dull it down as I go, because I don't like it to be so glossy shiny. I can always use another varnish on top that is less. Okay, so that's that. I can also, which is a good thing to do, is take the brush. One thing you kind of don't want to do is put your hands all over it, because what will happen is your hands will, I see a bump there, I want to press down a little better. Your hands have oil in them, and so you will actually make these oily, and it will change the color. So we'll move this one out of the way for a second. I had started this one, and you can see it broke. It was floating around like crazy. I'll take my parchment paper, rub this down. And get it nice and firm. And then we can finish it by removing what is not glued on. And so I might take my good old trusty parchment paper, and I will save some of these pieces that are going to get broken off because they are not actually glued on. And I do want to save those because I can use those pieces later. I can use them if it turns out that there's a section that didn't get covered. These can all be my patch-up pieces. So I guess I treat it like it's really gold, even though it's not. And while that one was broken, it actually tore in a rather convenient spot because it doesn't go down that far. And so I'll end up with a nice rough edge. And then I'm going to take the brush and I'm going to gently stroke this because I don't want to touch it with my hands. Although I have to tell you, sometimes I do, but I try not to. Try to make it easier. And very gently let this firm up. Now, I'm not going to rub it real hard yet. I want to give that sizing a chance to really heal up with the metal leaf. But there is going to be an overlay. I don't know if you can see it. There's an overlay where this piece overlaid that other piece. And so you can remove that by just very gently taking your brush and going away. Now, I'm going to pause because while I have a rough edge there, I don't want to work on that yet until I really know it has stuck on as much as possible. But I can remove some of this along the edge or just leave it until I'm ready because I don't want it to get so aggressive about removing it that I end up chipping the edge. It's kind of nice to have that good clear edge. And we'll see how this one is doing. I think I'm going to put him on a different paper because I'd like to save him since it's a different color. And I'll let it tear off a little bit and gently put it down. And I'll save that in a different sheet because it's not the same as that gold. And the same thing, you can join the gold leaf that's here because you're the same one. And now I'm going to just gently take that brush, remove what is not tacked down, because remember we only put the sizing down a certain way, and I will gently brush this. And you can see, it's funny, you worry about the seams, like if on a big painting you're going to have a lot of seams, but they really end up not showing. They end up really disappearing. So this is the start. And we're going to let this dry. We're not going to mess with it anymore until we're ready to put on the varnish. And that is one thing about metal leaf. You have to put on the varnish because it will tarnish, and where real gold leaf will not tarnish. And so that's one of the benefits of real gold leaf. You don't have to worry about varnish. Well, we're going to finish these up. You can see I've moved them back to the middle of the table. I can take my brush that you saw before. This is a relatively soft brush, so I will start with that one, and I'll really work on where those two met, and I'll work away some of this. Now, if I feel like I'm not getting as much removed as I want, I can take this stiffer brush and I can push away more of it. last step, we've glued this down, we've pressed it down, and then we took the brush and we used the brush to remove any kind of scraps that we don't want. It can be remove the ones on the edges like so. It will fluff right off. This is a very soft brush, so it won't damage anything I don't want it to damage. And I'm basically cleaning off the surface so that I can put on the varnish. And that's what's important, because this is metal leaf, it's not gold leaf, and it will tarnish. So you do have to coat it. The one that we were working on before, I brushed it all off. I got off some edges here that I wanted to get rid of, but I didn't like the seam that was developing there, because it was a lousy seam that was showing too much of the yellow. This seam I don't mind because I can work that into a design, but that one looked like a crack. So what did I do? I put a little bit more sizing on it. When that dries, I will put some gold leaf on top. And you know what? I might even put a different, like a variegated one, so it comes down like a stripe. And if I do that, I will show you that in a future video, because I'm going to keep reusing these. I'm going to be building on these so you can see how they change and what happens. Where we're looking at, there's a lot of gold here. Who knows? By the time I'm done with this, this whole painting might be a different color. So I give myself a lot of flexibility. The last part of this is going to be to apply varnish. And I do use this MSA varnish, which is a golden product, and the solvent to make it less thick, because this is pretty thick. And I use my trusty little, I'm going to get a little piece of paper because it's an awful messy little jar, my little pimento jar that I put the varnish in, and I mix it until I get a kind of like a thickness that I think is going to be reasonable to use. This is a glass jar, and that's why, and I like a small one because this is an awful lot of stuff to have lying around. But when I do that, I want to apply it with my brush, a nice soft brush, and get a good look. I'm going to get that little scrap off so that it doesn't get varnished on. I want to point out the reason why you use a glass jar. If you were to use a plastic container for these two things, it will dissolve it. And here's an example of a brush that fell into it, so you can get an idea. Yeah, it will melt and dissolve the plastic. So you cannot put this varnish in any kind of a plastic container to save it. So get yourself some pimentos. It's a nice size to work with. I believe I've got a pretty good kind of thickness to this, and then I will very carefully, I will cover this. Now I can put 2 coats, I can put 1 coat. This is a gloss varnish. I'm not going to overly mess with it because I don't want a whole bunch of brush strokes. I will go down onto the paint because later on I can, and I just very evenly press this nice varnish on top and get it to go right over to the edge, and then that will dry, and I will be able to paste on top of this. I will be able to glue on top of this, and then I also will be able to sand it if I decide I want to tone it down a little bit. I'm going to try to get that one down lower. If I can polish it with a sandpaper, or I could take paint and paint over it and end up with kind of the gold leaf behind, a nice haze of some color perhaps even. So it's pretty versatile when you put this on. So that's the last stage of getting this panel ready to go, and then we can start collaging it.